The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who is Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers, as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's Even Worse Than You Think by David K. Johnston.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Well, the Devin Nunes, the Memo Gate continues, the Devin Nunes national treason scandal. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it's very amazing. Actually, let me start by welcoming two new stations to our list of stations that carry our show, to our family. KWAI, AM 1080, picked up our show last week. The mighty 1080 in Honolulu, Hawaii, and thank you so much for putting us on the air, putting us back on the air on that station. And KFOI, FM 90.9 in Redding, California, also picked us up last week, so or perhaps the week before. But thank you very much. The Philadelphia Eagles won the if you weren't noticing. I couldn't watch it. We cut our cord, you know. We don't have cable, Louise and I. And so, you know, watching TV on the internet, I couldn't find the game. Now, probably there's, 16 ways to do it, and I'm just not sufficiently internet sophisticated. But I thought it was interesting that the Eagles, I thought it was great that the Eagles won, a team that has some really progressive members like Chris Long. Chris Long donated his entire salary for the year of 2018 to charity. And he sent his first 6 paychecks, as Ed Krasenstein tweets, to the Charlottesville scholarship programs. And he says that if, there's the winner of the Super Bowl goes to the White House and meets the president, and Chris Long says, nah, no interest. I ain't going. Ain't going to happen. So there's that. There's so much in the news I want to get to and get through today. And let me start with an article that Fareed Zakaria wrote in the Washington Post on the 1st of February last week. Back, what was that, last Tuesday or Wednesday or something like that. And I missed it somehow. I don't know how I missed it. He referenced it on his CNN program on Sunday, and I went off looking for it. And it's like, whoa. You'll recall President Obama said that and I believe it was in response to a reporter's question, so it might have been an offhand remark, but it may well have been, it was several years ago, I don't have the story, but it may have been part of a speech, but I'm pretty sure it was just a comment that if Syria used gas on its people, that would constitute a red line that he would not allow them to cross. And then they use gas on their people. Now, arguably, there's that word again, perhaps Obama was justifying the escalation of our, bombing of Syria by the gas. And in fact, that's my recollection. But still, that's not like, okay, you crossed this red line, that's it, you're out of here, Bashar al-Assad. Game over. In other words, Obama did not hold up that red line. Now, he never should have said it in the first place, because you don't, unless you're absolutely ready, unless the Pentagon has all the game plans in place, unless you're actually even hoping that they cross the red line, you don't publicize it. You don't say, oh, here's a red line, you cross that, and I'm going to kick your butt. You just don't do that. It's not even a good bluff. Well, Trump has done this 3 times now. And each one of these red lines could literally, that Trump has laid out, and they're all going to be crossed in the next few months, in all probability. And we haven't even gotten to the financial stuff and what's going on in the markets and what's, how the GOP tax scam is what's driving the market crash, because it's driving up government borrowing, which is driving up bond yields, which is driving down the bond market, which is driving down the stock market. But anyhow, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But the 3 lines that Trump has talked about are North Korea, Pakistan, and Iran. With North Korea, he said the era of strategic patience is over, and that North Korea will not be allowed to deploy a missile/nuclear bomb combination that is capable of reaching the United States. Now, that's a very stupid thing to say, frankly, because North Korea is going to do it. And then what are you going to do? I mean, North Korea is a client state of China. You want war with China? Really? And a war between North Korea and the United States would inevitably, immediately, I mean, like in the first 30 to 40 seconds of it, before our missiles even hit North Korea, they would give the order to fire their 8,000 artillery shells all over the demilitarized zone, the border between North and South Korea. And what's that going to do? It's going to kill millions of people in Seoul, South Korea. And if Trump keeps up his rhetoric, he might even do that. I mean, he might even provoke that. Mike Pompeo, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, says that North Korea is only a, quote, handful of months, end quote, away from this happening. And you'll recall Victor Cha was the guy, the fellow of Korean ancestry, who was appointed, or who was proposed by Donald Trump to be our ambassador to South Korea. And Cha came out last week, or at the tail end of the week before, and said the strategy that the Trump White House is trying to pursue of giving North Korea a bloody nose, in quotes, will basically only do one thing. It'll provoke war. We give North Korea a bloody nose. North Korea gives South Korea a bloody nose. We attack North Korea in an all-out war. China attacks us. I mean, that's how it plays out. Now, the question is, will China attack us with cyber? Will they take down a bunch of American cities using cyber warfare because they are apparently well entrenched into our internet infrastructure? In fact, much of our internet infrastructure and most of our government computers were actually manufactured in China. Let that one sink in. Or would China attack us conventionally or even nuclear? We don't know. But this will be a serious problem. And then with Iran, you've got 5 countries that negotiated this deal with Iran: Russia, Germany, England, France, and I believe China, the UK and China, and us. And all those other 5 countries are saying, hey, this is a good deal. It's preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Iran right now is going through a major liberalization, or at least, I would say revolutionary liberalization. You've got this no hijab movement that's going on, where women are opposing the forced hijab, the requirement from the government, the law that you must cover your head if you're a female. They're taking their hijabs off and, you know, waving them around and on YouTube. They're getting arrested, but they're gaining popularity in Iran. I mean, Iran has the potential to become a relatively liberal democracy way down the road if we just let it happen. But no, Trump has to mess around with this. And he says, and he says if, well, there's no if. He says if the deal isn't renegotiated, well, he's not renegotiating it. And in 3 months, it has to be recertified. Actually, 2.5 months now. And he says he's not going to recertify it. So, you know, either we're going to pull out of it, and Iran at that point can just say, okay, screw the deal, back to making nukes. And then you're looking at a World War III scenario. And then the third is Pakistan. Fareed Zakaria points out that Pakistan actually has been getting in bed with terrorists. So you'll recall that's where Osama bin Laden was living. And we said, because of that, we're going to pull your military aid. And all these experts were saying, you know, if you do that, Pakistan is going to jump into bed with China. Well, they did. And guess what happened? They started asserting their power in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden American soldiers are being killed left and right in Afghanistan because of this Trump policy. Why is nobody discussing this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So these 3 red lines are kind of dangerous. Then Trump has changed our nuclear policy. I got to tell you about this right after the break. This is astonishing. This is quite remarkable. What happens when the GOP's war on welfare comes for Medicaid? This is an interesting one. Amanda Gomez, writing for Think Progress, the progressive website, and she starts out telling the story of Thomas Pennister. He was in prison. When he got out of prison, he was uninsured. Turns out he was mentally ill. He had depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, sleep apnea, anxiety, and ADHD. The guy was a mess. Now, whether that's what led him to prison or whether that's what happens when when you're in prison, and when he came out, his brain was scrambled, nobody knows for sure. But this is the deal. And so Paul Ryan's response to this, well, what Paul Ryan is talking about doing at a federal level is what Scott Walker is doing in Wisconsin, is to say that people like him don't qualify for Medicaid. What the Republicans are doing, and they're doing it in 2 states right now, Wisconsin, and there's one other state that's considering this. I think that Wisconsin's already done it. The feds have approved it for Wisconsin. I believe it's Kentucky is the other state that they're talking about doing it. Is saying that if you're able-bodied and you're not working, you don't get Medicaid. Or you've got to spend 20 or 30 hours doing community service to get Medicaid. In other words, branding Medicaid a welfare program. Medicaid's not a welfare program. Health insurance is not welfare. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness includes life. This is nuts. There are 147,000, quote, childless adults in Wisconsin, and Scott Walker wants to kick them all off the Medicaid rolls. Why? Well, so that the state can save money. Why? So that they can give more tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations. Of course. This is the scam that the Republican Party has been running for years and years and years. They're totally into this neo-Calvinism, neo-Darwinism. Really, it's Herbert Spencerism, Darwin's cousin, who took Darwin's theory of evolution and applied it to economics. Survival of the fittest. To economics, that those who rise to the top are there because they're worthy. Don't you know? It's not because Donald Trump's daddy gave him, $100 million or whatever it was, enough to start his career. It's not because the Koch brothers' daddy gave them a fortune and an oil company. No. It's because they're so brilliant. They're just more brilliant than anybody. And so what do you do for the people who aren't so brilliant? That they had the good sense to have been born to a millionaire or a billionaire. What do you do about them? Well, in Paul Ryan's world, in Scott Walker's world, you let them die. You tell them, sorry, you're not eligible for Medicaid. We need Medicare for all in this country so badly. This is an absolute crisis, that we are the only developed country in the world that does not guarantee health care as a right. The only one in the world. Let that sink in. Anyhow, we'll be back. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
So Donald Trump, W.J. Hennigan wrote a fairly lengthy piece in Time magazine on the 1st of February. And he points out that our nuclear preparedness, back in '93, there was a law passed that had to do with nuclear preparedness. In fact, I believe that was part of the name of the law. And it says that if the president orders a nuclear test, say that there's some advance in nuclear technology. We've developed a new kind of bomb, or we've changed the configuration of our bombs in some way, and we need to figure out, does this actually work? Or how well does this work? Or how badass is this particular bomb, or whatever it may be. That when the president orders the test, it has to be done within 3 years. Ideally within 2. Because that's how long it takes to dig a giant hole in the ground, because we do our tests underground so that we don't, when we used to do them above ground, John Wayne and everybody else downwind got cancer. It's just an epidemic of cancers, and an epidemic across the Midwest, downwind from the 1950s and early 60s, I believe, certainly the 1950s, nuclear tests. Downwind from that, you've got this epidemic of thyroid cancers. That's from the radioactive iodine from the above-ground nuclear test. So we do it underground. So if you're going to do a nuclear test underground, you got to dig a giant hole. You've got to line it with concrete and stuff. You've got to put all kinds of sensors and instrumentation into it. You've got to set up a station to monitor, a telemetry station, to monitor the input, the data from those sensors, like miles away, where people won't be fried or earthquaked out by the nuclear test. It takes a couple of years to build that kind of infrastructure to do a nuclear test. But Trump wants, Trump is like Mr. Immediate Gratification. I want it and I want it now. This is why he so stupidly went to Davos and gave a speech about how wonderful the stock market was. You never brag about the stock market, never take credit for the stock market if you're president of the United States. No one ever has, to the best of my knowledge, because every president before Trump was smart enough to realize that in a 4-year period, odds are the market's not going to continuously go up. It never has. Well, it might have gone up for 4 years. An 8-year period, almost never. So instead, you just, you let the good times roll. You don't have to brag about it. Well, the same thing with nukes. But Trump has told his Department of Energy, Rick Perry, and if you think that Rick Perry, certifiable genius, is going to be saying to Donald Trump, hey, wait a minute, remember Moniz? The Obama's Secretary of Energy? The guy had a PhD in physics. He's been replaced by Rick Perry. Yep, yeah, that's Rick Perry, yep. Oh, my God. So Trump says to Rick Perry, I want my test within 6 months. I want my test within... No, I can't do it. By the imitations, Jimmy Fallon was brilliant doing Bob Dylan, by the way. Thanks, Sean, for sharing that with me. It was incredible. Anyhow, Trump says, I want this in 6 months. Now, maybe that has to do with the fact that all 3 of his red lines he's going to pass in 3 months, and he figures, well, I can hang on for 3 more months after that, but then I got to drop a nuke on somebody or scare them so much they'll do exactly what I want. And most of these countries are not easily scared, which is why they are who and where they are, specifically Pakistan, Iran, and North Korea. So Trump says he wants it in 6 months. And according to this article in Time, well, I'll quote from it, the point this and other sources say would be to show Russia's Vladimir Putin and yeah, right. We need a nuclear war with Russia. Isn't that a great idea? Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other adversaries what they're up against. What, you think they don't know we've got nukes? You've got to explode a nuclear weapon to show them that we have nuclear... What kind of... This is incredible. I'm also seeing something really weird over at the Washington Post. I quoted Donald Trump from the Washington Post in the article that I have in Alternate right now. It's the title of the article, the Alternate article. It's right there on the homepage, or alternate.org. Did Trump just announce his 9/11 unification strategy? Trump believes a war will bring us together behind him. And get this. Here is the quote from, and I used the Washington Post quote, which I shouldn't have done. I should have used the NPR quote because I think it's far more accurate. But here is how NPR reported what Donald Trump said. Quote, this is Donald Trump speaking, I would love to be able to bring back our country into a great form of unity. Without a major event where people pull together, that's hard to do. Here's how the Washington Post wrote it. They made it 3 sentences instead of 2. They made it, I would love to be able to bring back our country into a great form of unity without a major event where people pull together. That's hard to do. In other words, they completely changed the meaning from the actual quote. Has Jeff Bezos decided that it's time to suck up to Donald Trump? Well, if you're worth $100 billion and the President of the United States has the ability to make or break 10 or 20 billion of that, maybe. I don't know. I just find it very, very strange. Anyhow, back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the billionaire party doesn't need the FBI. We'll get to that, too. I got to tell you about Carter Page, too, right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. Welcome back. A tip of the hat to the ever brilliant, ever on top of everything Sue Nethercott, who runs our chat room and puts together our newsletter every day. And, you know, I said I thought Obama's remark about the red line was just an offhand remark that he made to a reporter. And whereas, you know, Trump has had speechwriters include these things in speeches. So, you know, Trump has put himself in a box intentionally. I think Obama just blew it with a one-liner. And here it is. It was September 4th, 2013. And in fact, a year earlier, on August 20th, 2012, he had said, I didn't set a red line, the world set a red line. But on September 4th, 2013, he said, oh, no, I'm sorry, that was 2012. And then, okay, let's start over again. In 2012, Obama said, this was remarks to reporters. Okay, so this was not a speech. He said, we have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation. And then when he was asked about that, almost a little more than a year later, September 4th, 2013, in Stockholm, Sweden, again at a press conference, he says, I didn't set a red line. The world set a red line. So he walked it back, basically. But, you know, there it is. Trump this morning tweeting Fox and Friends. Fox and Friends went off on a tirade about the British National Health Service. Oh, we can't have socialized medicine. It's always a failure. It's a terrible thing. And so Trump tweets out, hey, thanks for the truth, Fox and Friends. Fox and Friends was lying as usual. This is Trump's tweet. The Democrats are pushing for universal health care while thousands of people are marching in the UK because their system is going broke and not working. Dems want to greatly raise taxes for really bad and non-personal medical care. No thanks. Right. British journalist David Otwell writes in response, Brits are in the streets marching to protect the National Health Service, not to protest it, not to replace it with a privatized system. And it's just a whole tweet storm here. This, you know, Donald Trump watching Fox and Friends. Fox, you know, the hosts and the producers are not known for their intellect or their research. This is a network owned by Trump's good friend, Rupert Murdoch, billionaire Trump. And I need to start putting the word billionaire before Trump, before Republican Party, before GOP. It's the billionaire Trump and his billionaire friend, Rupert Murdoch, and the billionaire-owned Fox News Network, all trying to convince us non-billionaires that Medicare for all would be a bad thing for us. Why? Because it would raise taxes on billionaires. It's that simple. Carter Page. I mentioned Carter Page last Friday, and I like to clean it up when I make mistakes on the air, and I made a big mistake on the air here. I said that Carter Page was Paul Manafort's business partner. No, that's Rick Gates. And I had just somehow mixed them up in my brain. Carter Page was the guy that from 2004 to 2007 lived in Russia, worked on energy stuff. In 2013, in 2013 he was working with the Russians, and he was told by the FBI that went out of their way to track him down, or the CIA or somebody, you know, the U.S. government contacted him and said, you know, because apparently he had been meeting with people who were actually spies, Russian spies, intelligence operatives, and said, you know, you're meeting with somebody who's like in charge of recruiting spies. And Carter Page just ignored the warning and continued doing this. And in 2013, Carter Page bragged. Now, this is 2013, right? This is before Donald Trump was in the White House. This was before the presidential race was rolling. This was before Carter Page had anything to do with Donald Trump. In 2013, Carter Page was bragging that he was an advisor to the Kremlin. And now you've got Devin Nunes trying to say that, you know, Carter Page was being surveilled because of the Steele memo? Really? The FBI had Carter Page under surveillance since 2013. The Nunes memo is complete BS. But you won't hear that on right-wing hate radio. You won't hear that on the Sean Hannity show. You won't hear that on billionaire-owned Fox so-called news or billionaire-supported Sean Hannity. It's incredible. I mean, just the willingness to just breathtakingly lie to the American public coming out of the billionaire-owned Fox News and then being repeated by billionaire Donald Trump. This is what Carter Page said in August of 2013. 6 years ago. 5 years ago. I never claimed to be a mathematician. Over the past, a quote from Carter Page, quote, over the past half year, I have had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin in preparation for their presidency of the G20 summit next month, where energy issues will be a prominent point on the agenda. You'll recall Donald Trump bragged, when they said, who do you have, who knows about this, that, and that? Oh, yeah, I got Carter Page. He knows all about energy. I got George Papadopoulos. He knows all about foreign policy. Papadopoulos, I believe, has already pled guilty. And this was 2 months, by the way, Carter Page said this, 2 months after U.S. intelligence agencies met with him and told him that he was, in all probability, being basically solicited to be a spy. Maybe he is a spy. Maybe he was a spy. Maybe he both is and was a spy. But now you've got John Dean, Richard Nixon's White House lawyer, John Dean, who was ordered by Nixon to write a whitewash memo and instead went to the Watergate committee and said, there's a cancer on the presidency. John Dean saying that Devin Nunes should be in jail, as well as his staffer, Mr. Patel. He said, and I quote, they both belong in jail for betraying national security with their scam. That's incredible. I want to get into Donald Trump reversing the national debt or jacking the national debt, what Ivanka Trump is up to. This is mind-boggling. Kimberly Clark and Trump's broken promise. We've got so much stuff that I want to share with you today. That's the bad news, I guess, in terms of me and my time. The good news is that we've got another 2.25 hours to do it in, so we will get to it all. Plus, we're going to have a debate with one of our favorite conservatives about Nazis in the Republican Party. This should be fun. So we'll see where this goes. It is, yeah, we got a couple minutes here. Let's pick up Paul in Anchorage, Alaska. Hey, Paul, it says you're a Trump supporter and a mayoral candidate. Tell me about it.
Well, let's see. I am that, and I love Trump. I referred to him as an archangel in the sense that the magnitude of the engagement that we've seen or currently seeing, we've never seen before in my lifetime.
Oh, I agree. You recall that Satan was an archangel too, Lucifer.
Well, I did not know that, quite frankly.
Yeah, he's an angel who fell from grace. That's the whole story of Lucifer / Satan.
Okay, so I'll have to find some new phraseology, which
I would suggest that.
Commingled, right? No, I love Mr. Trump for a multitude of reasons. He's a multifaceted engagement, but from my perspective, his children were the final decision maker. That any man can have 3 children that doesn't do cigarettes, drugs, or alcohol, or hang out in some disco bar at 2 a.m. That's a hell of an accomplishment.
I have 3 children, and to the best of my knowledge, none of them have drug or alcohol problems, and they don't hang out in disco bars. Does that mean I should be president?
Well, if you want to run for it, it'd certainly be a better consideration.
Well, speaking of their children, Ivanka Trump and Marco Rubio are putting together a plan to pay for 6 months of maternity leave. And this was published today by David Edwards over at Raw Story. And their plan is you will have the ability, this is Ivanka Trump's family leave plan. You can borrow it from your Social Security account, but you have to postpone your retirement. So if you take 6 months off to care for your newly born child, you can't retire when you're 67. You have to wait until you're 67 and a half. What do you think?
geez, I think I need to be a lawyer and I need an advisory team to figure that one out.
Sounds pretty straightforward to me. They love screwing Social Security. That's the Republican thing to do. I don't get why you like Trump, Paul. Can you give me one reason other than just everything you've said so far has been just largely rhetorical? What policy of Trump's do you like?
Well, first of all, I think he put a tremendous amount on the line. It's one thing to own a bunch of stock portfolios, but to own real estate that has glass buildings you can throw rocks at from miles away, that takes a hell of a man willing to put a lot on the line. But my biggest reason was it seemed to me we were devolving into a confrontation of cultures. It's morally inclined as opposed to morally deviant. And not only that, but...
In other words, you don't like gay marriage?
Oh, let me tell you something. I'll never support men marrying men.
Yeah.
The very concept of that is
so you're a homophobe and a bigot, and Trump is too, and that's why you're supporting him?
See, and that's when Thom Hartmann, when men use that kind of language to insult or assault me, I can't understand. You sound like a reasonable man, but to call me those negative terminologies.
Well, what would you call yourself?
I think I'm a morally inclined man who goes to understand the instant. Are you married? You're married with children, right?
I am. 46 years I've been married.
And my compliments to you. I'm divorced, but the point.
Well, then you're not a moral man, Paul. The Catholic Church doesn't want to have anything to do with you.
Tom, I didn't. I'm trying to have a considerable conversation.
Yeah, Paul, I should. Paul, we're hitting a break, and it's a hard break. I don't have any control over it. I would like to have a conversation with you. I'd like to have a longer conversation with you, and I'll try not to interrupt you as much. Give me a call later in the week and remind Arthur about our conversation, and I'll try to put you on the air when I've got more than just a minute and a half, okay?
Well, thank you, Tom. You sure? I'll do that.
Thank you, Paul. Look forward to talking with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Michael in Sacramento, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind? And thanks for watching Free Speech TV, Michael. Whoop! I think Michael tried to unmute his phone and he hit hang up. It happens a lot. Let's try David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
It seems to me that the Trump administration and America, we are on a warpath.
Yes.
And, I mean, when you listen to that State of the Union last week, to me, it just sounded like a military rally.
Yeah, we have been ever since, early 2003, really, with Bush's invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Right.
And, the fact that we've been at war for so long.
17 years.
17 years. I get the sense that Americans, at least ones just that don't pay that much attention to politics, kind of don't care less about it. War has become normalized. It
is mind-boggling, David. I mean, FDR won and Truman won World War II in what, 3.5 years, something like that. Vietnam dragged on for a while. It was maybe 10 years, 12 years of really serious hot conflict. But 17, the Korean War was only a couple of years. I don't think we've ever had a 17-year war in the history of the United States.
Right. And my fear is, with all the talk with North Korea, Iran, Russia, I mean, we're not just looking at, a small scale war. This is going to be something that will be very destructive, very destructive.
Oh, I think it could be World War III, and it could be one that devastates, that renders the planet not necessarily completely uninhabitable for all of humanity, but one that destroys civilization, a civilization-destroying war.
Exactly.
We basically, to use the phrase from the Nixon era, bomb ourselves back to the Stone Age.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. It's just it's quite something to behold, knowing just how our country used to function before the military-industrial complex got its stranglehold on our government. So it's sad, but we don't.
So what are we going to do about it, David?
We have to get politically active. I mean, and we have to not just get politically active. We We have to take back our government. We have to take back our, entire structure of government. We have to get people to realize that government is not some foreign entity or some abstraction. It is who we are. We are able to dictate it, but right now the mass of people don't understand that, I feel. And that's what's in our way, is getting people educated for them to understand that you are a part of the government, you have a voice in the government, and all you have to do is organize and demand what you want your country to be for. And I think that's what we're missing.
Yeah, this is why the Constitution talks about we, the people of the United States. It's just, we are the sovereigns, essentially. We are the ones who own and run our government, and through our elected representatives. But tragically, the Buckley decision in 1976 by the Supreme Court started the process, and then Citizens United, put it on steroids, of handing the government of the United States over to the billionaire oligarch class. David, thank you for the call. Well said. I'm concerned about war too, and and it's an ongoing thing, and it shouldn't be. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I was hearing about the paternity leave of Ivanka Trump in the 1940s. You didn't need maternity leave. A mom could just stay home and take care of the kids while the dad worked a full-time job. Yeah,
that was before Reagan got a hold of the economy and shifted us from a one worker per family economy to a 2.3, I think it is right now, worker per family economy.
I benefited from the vocational rehabilitation office through a job agency and found a part-time job because of my autism spectrum, and then I'm applying for disability. How will Trump's cuts affect me?
That's a very good question, Dion. I would say the first thing that we know is going to happen is if the Republican budget, which has a $459 million cut to the administration of Social Security, if that goes through, the amount of time that it's going to take to process claims, the amount of time to renew your eligibility, the amount of time for people who have your challenges and are just trying to apply for Social Security disability, it's going to be massively longer, more complicated, and more frustrating. Which, of course, is their goal. They hate Social Security, and they figure they haven't been able to convince the American people Social Security is terrible, so they're going to turn it terrible so that the American people will go, hey, wait a minute, this is like the DMV, So,
can the states appeal that, or no?
No. Social Security has nothing to do with the states. At the level of Medicaid, the states have something to say. But Social Security and Medicare are entirely federal programs. Dion, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a very important question, and it's not just for people who are autistic. It's the entire spectrum of disabilities and challenges that people have in life, where Social Security disability can give them a little hand up, and it's just a tragedy what the billionaire Republicans and billionaire Trump are doing. Wayne in Chicago. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I have an experiment I want to do, Tom. You have your cell phone handy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. After you get through talking to me and the other people out there listening, go to YouTube and put in RT for a search and see what comes up. Time I do it on my cell phone, YouTube is completely cutting me off from even seeing RT. So
Yeah.
this is my question to you.
Well,
Tom.
I'm no longer on RT, and I have nothing to do with that television network any longer, Wayne.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about when I do a search, RT, on YouTube, they won't even let me go to the RT site, to the channel.
Really?
So I want other people to try. I want you to try it. I want other people to try it. Put search RT in on YouTube.
Okay.
And see
Wayne,
what
Nate
people to the channel.
just did that, and he says he's got no problem getting to it. So
Okay.
maybe,
Okay.
I don't know who's messing with your phone, or maybe it's just not plugged in right or something. I just...
No, there's nothing wrong with it at all.
Yeah.
And this has been like 3 days now. But here's another example, Tom. There's a young lady and a young man. They have a channel on YouTube. They were going to do a documentary about Hitler in World War II. All historical facts. YouTube told them they could not do it. They had to go to Facebook. So my question to you is, Tom, where's the ACLU with people like these people? Don't you think they're out of control and going too far? I thought this was America.
Yeah. This is, I had a conversation about this over the weekend with a friend who has a Nest thermometer in his living room that we had breakfast, Louise and I had breakfast with Sunday morning. And, I was like, okay, who owns Nest? And he was like, Google. And I was like, okay, so because he was like, every room in the house, if he goes into that room, it knows where he is and it knows how long he's there and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, so Google knows everything about you and your home. And he was like, yeah, I guess that's the price you pay for convenience. And it's like what we're looking at here is no longer government big brother. We're looking at a corporate big brother. And this is probably why the ACLU is not involved, Wayne, because the American Civil Liberties Union was formed to defend us, to defend essentially the First Amendment. And the First Amendment says that government shall not pass laws. It doesn't say that Google shall not pass laws, or YouTube shall not, which is owned by Google, shall not pass laws.
That's my question. Aren't they breaking the laws of the Constitution?
No.
Even though they're private corporations, aren't they still breaking federal or state or local law?
Yeah. No, they're not. And that's the thing. I mean, this is why, if you go back to the Reagan era, when Reagan started privatizing government functions, one of the reasons why billionaire-funded Republicans love to privatize government functions, in addition to giving money to their buddies who will then kick it back to the billionaire class and to the billionaire-funded Republican Party, the other main reason that they love doing it is because corporations don't have to follow the First Amendment. Only government has to follow the First Amendment, or the Fourth Amendment, for that matter. Or the 14th Amendment, for that matter. I mean, corporations are not constrained by the Constitution. So if a corporation wants to spy on you, you cannot use a constitutional argument against that. You could argue invasion of privacy if there's a state or federal law that protects that, but not the Constitution. And that's that. And now this is one of the reasons why the Europeans are looking at organizations like Google or Alphabet, its parent company that owns like I said, Nest and YouTube and everything else, and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is too much power concentrated in one corporation. And I think that this is the next reckoning that we're going to have, Wayne. It really is. But by the way, Sean just checked RT on her phone and it works just fine. Wayne, thanks for the call.
Okay. All right.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edmund Morgan's book, The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. It's a small book. It's anecdotes of the three presidents. I think he's a little harsh on Jefferson and a little too friendly about Adams, you know, small quibbles. But it's a fascinating look into the founders of this country. And so today I'm going to read from the chapter on George Washington. The King of England, George III, was fond of farming. His favorite diversion was to ride about his lands, chatting with the tenants about the crops. Farmer George, he called himself. His arch opponent, George Washington, had the same fondness for farming. He too enjoyed riding about his lands and talking about the crops. Indeed, there was nothing else he enjoyed quite so much. But there the likeness ceased. And among the many other matters that differentiated George Washington from George III, none was more striking than George Washington's greater reserve and dignity. George Washington would never have taken the liberty of calling himself Farmer George, nor would he have allowed anyone else to do so. Even his friends took care to keep their distance, and those who forgot to were apt to be brought up short. A familiar anecdote, though perhaps apocryphal, well illustrates Washington's customary posture toward himself and toward others. During a meeting of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a group of Washington's friends were remarking on his extraordinarily reserved and remote manner, even among his most intimate acquaintances. Governor Morris, who was always full of boldness and wit, had the nerve to disagree. He could be as familiar with Washington, he said, as with any of his other friends. Alexander Hamilton called his bluff by offering to provide a supper and wine for a dozen of them if Morris would, at the next reception Washington gave, simply walk up to him, gently slap him on the shoulder and say, "My dear General, how happy I am to see you look so well." On the appointed evening, a substantial number of people were already present when Morris arrived, walked up to Washington, bowed, shook hands, and then placed his left hand on Jefferson's shoulder and said, "My dear General, I am so happy to see you look so well." The response was immediate and icy. Washington reached up and removed the hand, stepped back, and fixed his eye in silence on Morris until Morris retreated, abashed, into the crowd. The company looked on in embarrassment, and no one ever tried it again. It seems a most un-American reaction, not the sort of thing that Americans like to see in the men they honor, certainly not the sort of thing one would look for in a leader of a popular revolution today. Yet Americans then and since have honored George Washington far beyond any other man in their history. Moreover, he earned the honor and his dignity and reserve. The aloofness that still separates him from us helped him to earn it. How this came about is part of the larger story of American independence, the story of how the American Revolution transformed some of the least lovable traits of a seemingly ordinary man into national assets. For besides his aloofness, Washington had other characteristics which at this distance appear less than admirable, but which served him and the nation well in the struggle for independence. Perhaps the most conspicuous of these traits, conspicuous at least in his surviving correspondence, was an unabashed concern for his own economic interest. Although Washington was fair in his dealings and did not ask favors of any man, he kept a constant, wary, and often cold eye on making a profit, ever suspicious, and not always without reason, that other men were trying to take advantage of him. Like most Virginia planters, he complained that London merchants were giving him too little for his tobacco or charging him too much for the goods he bought from them. When he rented to tenants, he demanded to be paid punctually and dismissed men's inability to meet their obligations as irresponsibility or knavery. If a man was so foolish as to try cheating him, he was capable of a fury that came through vividly in his letters, as when he wrote to one associate that, "All my concern is that I ever engaged myself in behalf of so ungrateful and dirty a fellow as you are." In operating his plantation at Mount Vernon, he inveighed endlessly against waste of time, waste of supplies, waste of money. "A penny saved is a penny got," he would say, or "many mickles make a muckle," by which he apparently meant that many small savings would add up to a larger one. Even in dealings with his mother, he was watchful, for he thought she had extravagant tastes. He was ready to supply her real wants, he said, but found her imaginary wants indefinite and oftentimes insatiable. Even after he left Mount Vernon in order to win a war and found a nation, his intense absorption with his estate persisted, somehow curiously out of place now and out of proportion to the historic events that he was grappling with. In the darkest hours of the war and later during some of the tensest national crises, he took time to write to the managers of his plantation about making it show a profit. In early December 1776, for example, after fleeing across the Delaware with the remnants of his army, he sent home instructions to make do without buying linen for the slaves, as a price is too heavy to be borne with. And while he was president, his weekly directives to his managers far exceeded in length the documents he prepared for his subordinates in government. No detail was too small for his attention. In December 1792, while his cabinet was rent by the feud between Jefferson and Hamilton, he sent orders that Anthony's, this is one of his slaves presumably, sore toe should be examined, and if it requires it, something should be done to it. Otherwise, as usual, it will serve him as apprentice to be in the House half the winter. 3 months later, when Hamilton was under attack in the House of Representatives for alleged corruption in the Treasury Department, Washington was worried that Caroline, who was never celebrated for her honesty, would steal some of the linen she was entrusted with cutting.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to our program. On the line with us is conservative activist and noted nicotine addict Julio Rivera, editorial director of Reactionary Times, columnist with Newsmax, Right Wing News, and Politichicks. ReactionaryTimes.com is the website, and you can tweet him at, "Oh yeah, it's Julio." Julio, welcome back to the program.
Well, how are you today, Tom? I'm happy to be here.
I am well, and I'm glad to know that you are happy. Arthur Jones has it looks like he's going to be the nominee, and now this is admittedly a largely Democratic district, so probably most mainstream Republicans aren't all that interested in, jumping into the race, spending money on the race or whatever. But Arthur Jones is going to be the Republican nominee for a part of Chicago and Illinois, representing parts of Chicago and nearby suburbs. He is an outspoken Holocaust denier. He is an activist anti-Semite. He is a proud white supremacist. On his website for his latest congressional run, there's a section titled "The Holocaust Racket," where he calls the Holocaust, quote, "the biggest, blackest lie in history." And, what is it about the Republican Party? I would start out by saying, the Democratic Party, if somebody came to the Democratic Party and said, "I am a Maoist and a communist," they would have no chance of being in a Democratic,
Really?
Well, you have an example of one? What's with the Republican Party that attracts these people?
Look no further at how far we've shifted left. And listen, you can't do that with this guy. We're not claiming this guy. The Republican Party, I'm sure in Illinois, wants nothing to do with this race, and that's the reason why he's running basically unopposed. If you want to go ahead and try to stick this guy on us ideologically, it's a lie anyway, because, listen, Trump and the Republicans have been more pro-Israel than Obama and the Democrats in trying to, usurp the re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu when he was there. And just a lot of things that the Democrat Party has done over the years.
There's no such thing as a Democrat Party, Julio.
The Republican Party.
Julio, there's no such thing as a Democrat Party. It's the Democratic Party. I know Joe McCarthy put the word out back in the 50s.
Party, no.
I know Joe McCarthy put the word out back in the 50s that when you refer to the Democratic Party named by Thomas Jefferson, that you should refer to it as the Democrat Party with an emphasis on the rat. That was his quote. And you're carrying on a fine tradition, but it's not going to happen on this program. So why do you think that Arthur Jones didn't declare himself a Democrat?
Well, because he's probably not someone who can actually win, and he can't win as a Republican either. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's leftist elements that are funding this just to continue to perpetuate this false narrative that Republicans are somehow the racist party. The ideology switch, when there was only one legislator, Strom Thurmond, who ever switched parties. The Democrats were filibustering the Civil Rights Act for about 2 months as recent as the 1960s. You remember this well, Tom.
Yeah, you're right.
If I'm not mistaken, weren't you a Barry Goldwater supporter at this time as a young boy?
When I was 13 years old, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I think you had it figured out a little better then.
Well, at the time, and I'll say this right up front, I had no idea that Barry Goldwater, and I'm still skeptical, was a racist. I know he opposed the civil rights legislation. He felt that that should be at the state level, and I think that was a political mistake. But I don't think he was ideologically a racist. But you know, I'm not here to defend Barry Goldwater. What I'm confused by. Well, let me just get a thought out, if you would, Julio. What I'm confused by is how Donald Trump can say that the guys who are marching in Charlottesville, who are saying, "You will not replace me, Jews will not replace me," were really fine people, and won't walk back that statement.
No, you're taking that completely out of context. Michael Signer.
Just a simple question, Julio. Just a simple question. Which party has white nationalists, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis supporting their nominee, their president? Which party has that?
Well,
it looks to me like it's the billionaire-owned Republican Party.
Jim Crow laws. Which party fought for slavery? Which party created the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction to terrorize blacks? It certainly wasn't the Republicans.
And it wasn't today's Democratic Party either. It wasn't today's Democratic Party either, and you can't win that argument by going back 150 years.
Ideological switching, no.
Sure, there's been a lot of ideological switching in both parties. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive and a Republican. Can you name one progressive Republican?
Well, I can't name a good one, but let me tell you something. What you're trying to get at, and the whole theme of this segment, and I understand what I was walking into right when I walked into it, you're trying to paint the Republican Party as the party of neo-Nazism and white supremacy.
That's correct.
And it's not. They're a fringe element, and I wouldn't be shocked. These David Dukes and all these other Daily
David Duke is tweeting admiration of Trump.
Claim the Trump movement. It's a lie. It has nothing to do with that. People like me and disenfranchised Americans voted for Trump and the Republican Party and continue to do so.
I don't understand why anybody. Well, I understand why people would vote for Trump. He made a lot of promises. You know, he said that he was going to cut average people's taxes and that the super rich would pay more. That was a lie. He promised to close special interest loopholes. He said, and I quote, "Special interest loopholes have been so good for Wall Street investors but unfair to American workers, especially the notorious carried interest."
Deep into that tax bill, multinationals
it was a lie.
That have foreign income are having a harder time under this. So no, you're lying. That's
no, actually, there's a provision in the
Tax Cut Act.
There is a provision in the billionaire-owned Republican tax bill that actually encourages companies to send their jobs overseas, that gives them more of a tax break. They're now paying a 21%.
And the Trump economy has been about recovering jobs.
Not true. He also told you he'd repeal Obamacare and replace it with something beautiful. Remember that? He was going to make sure that all Americans were covered.
And I wrote a column for Newsmax about this last week. You can't just slap something together and, you know, try to pass it off on the American people and get it past the Freedom Caucus. That was a mistake by the early administration because of the establishment element, people like Reince Priebus that were in the president's ear at that time.
Okay, so his lie was just a mistake. Okay, we got that. He told you that he was going to invest $1 trillion in our nation's crumbling infrastructure. The plan that I see is that he's going to put $20 billion a year for 10 years, and he expects private industry to put like $100 billion a year for 10 years. And for that $100 billion, the private industry is going to get a $200 billion return on investment by charging you and me tolls for roads and bridges, which is going to, jack their profits. Yeah, I get that.
Listen, I'd rather drive on a privately owned road that's not going to destroy the front end of my car, to be quite honest with you. And we should have more privatization, to be honest with you. It's just like the Puerto Rico issue. You can't just keep throwing money at it, taxpayer money at it, and letting it get corrupted. You need private industry and oversight from D.C. to fix these issues.
And every time you privatize a government function, ultimately it's going to cost as much as 70%. This is government, U.S. government official figures out of the Pentagon. 70% more than when the government does it itself.
Come up with the best price and the best service.
He told you he's,
quote, that than let some legislators
Trump said he was
that are being funded by special interests decide where the money goes.
Trump said he was going to, quote, bring down drug prices by making deals with drug companies. Now he says, the White House officially says that promise is inoperative. He told you he was going to, quote, stop foreign lobbyists from raising money for American elections. Apparently you bought that, right?
Banned, if they work in the administration, from being foreign lobbyists for 5 years after they leave the administration. So he's taking the steps he can take.
No, that is absolutely not true at all. He could easily ban foreign lobbyists from operating or from raising money for American elections. He hasn't.
To be a
he also said
type of authoritarian president and just objectively say there'll be no more foreign lobbying.
He also said, "I'm not going."
Arguing about how it's a global economy. So, how would that benefit your cause?
Now we know the billionaire-owned. We know the billionaire Trump scam here. Billionaire Trump also said, "I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican up on this stage, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid." And apparently, you bought that lie from billionaire Trump.
Well, no, he hasn't cut anything. If you're talking about a cut,
$259 million cut to Social Security in the budget.
Maybe the percentage doesn't have to go up as quickly. Listen, these are a lot of things that are on the table that haven't even been decided yet. You're being completely speculative. And again, just like everybody else in the liberal or mainstream media, just bashing the bashing the administration needlessly.
Well, I wouldn't say needlessly, but yes, I am. I will own that. Julio Rivera, editorial director with Reactionary Times, reactionarytimes.com. You can tweet him at Oh Yeah, It's Julio, Y-E-A-H. Oh Yeah, It's Julio. Julio, thanks for dropping by.
Not a problem. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Hartman. Okay, I just wanted to tie together two things. If the Nunes Hail Mary memo results in Rosenstein and Mueller getting let go, and if Team Trump skate of all charges, what would happen if massive peaceful protests took place all over the U.S. and one protest took place along the border of two states? The governor of one state called up his National Guard and ordered them to go down there, keep the peace, and if need be, make some arrests, but by no means don't shoot anybody. The governor of the other state ordered his National Guard to go down there and do like they did in Ludlow, to start cracking heads, shooting people with rubber bullets, etc. Would the National Guard of the one state ordered not to shoot people just have to stand there and watch the other state's National Guard crack heads, shoot people with rubber bullets, sound cannons, etc.,
yes,
like they did in North Dakota?
Yes. The answer to the question is yes, as far as I know. I'm not an authority on National Guard, but I do understand how these things were constructed. And the National Guard at the state level is essentially a state militia. And it only, unless it is specifically empowered by the federal government, in other words, mobilized by the federal government, it is answerable to the governor of the state and can only function within the state that has authorized, created, and deployed it.
Correct. They're in the wrong jurisdiction if they walk over that border, right? Right.
Yep.
So I just find that wild how one governor wants to shoot people with rubber bullets, whatever, non-lethal, and the other governor doesn't.
Well, there's an analogy to this, Michael, that makes it really obvious. You've got two states next to each other all over the country where one state offers everybody Medicaid for, Medicare, they expanded Medicaid, so people don't get sick, they can get treatment for their addictions, they can it's not a public health crisis, things like that. And in the next state, people are literally dying because Republican governors are refusing to expand Medicaid. So, I mean, you're talking about shooting people with rubber bullets in a non-lethal fashion. This is shooting people with the lack of Medicaid, which is lethal. So actually, you've got some states, Matt Bevin's in Kentucky right now, he's trying to dial back the Medicaid expansion of his predecessor, and that's going to cause people in Kentucky to die. I don't have a map in front of me. I don't recall which all the states are that abut Kentucky, but at least one of them has to have expanded Medicaid. So there you've got you know, it's not as visible. It's not like troops going out and putting guns to people, but it is, you know, it's policy that has the same effect.
I agree, and I do respect the people in the National Guard. You know, they're doing their service, but what they did at Standing Rock was just unbelievable. You know, negative degree weather, and they're shooting them with water cannons and rubber bullets. That's crazy, man.
Yeah, no, it was a crime. It really was and it was a crime against American democracy. It was a crime against the First Amendment. And, you know, I know that there's some litigation around what happened at Standing Rock. I don't know what the status of it is. Sean, we should get one of the Standing Rock people back on for an update on that. Say what?
I'll update you after.
Okay, Nate will update us on it. Yeah, it's a good idea. Michael, it's a very good idea.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you, Michael. This whole situation of state sovereignty is a fascinating one. And, you know, I like Bernie's idea that states are laboratories of democracy. This is Jefferson's phrase. And he was suggesting, and Vermont actually did it, that individual states try single payer. It turns out Vermont with 600,000 people just wasn't big enough to make it work. But California, maybe. We'll see. I mean, it's going to have to get past the Speaker of the Assembly. But anyhow, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
This is absolutely fascinating. Arthur Jones, an outspoken Holocaust denier, anti-Semite, white supremacist, is going to be the Republican nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Illinois, one of them. And yeah, okay, the Republican Party says, no, we don't want him. He says it out loud. You get it? The billionaire-owned Republican Party doesn't want white racists, you know, white anti-Semites and white supremacists who are open about it, right? They don't like David Duke. They don't like Harry Jones. But, you know, white supremacists and racists who are willing to speak in more or less code, oh, they're just fine with that. It's a marvelous thing. We should come up with a, Nate and Sean, we should come up with a music setup for this thing. It's time to read our email from Donald J. Trump. Da-da-da! Okay, Fred Flintstone. They won't stand for the national anthem. They won't stand for record low unemployment, a booming American economy, or a call for American unity at the president's first State of the Union. So we're not sure what the Democrats will stand for. But our president stands for America, for our flag, and for our heroic veterans. So, Fred, if you stand with President Trump, add your name to our official Stand for America petition and send a message before the Super Bowl this Sunday. Yeah, I got this Saturday. But, you know, it's the weekend. Thank you, and God bless America. I got it from DonaldJTrump.com. Trump Pence up at the top. Donald Pence, by the way, Donald Trump, Donald Pence. Vice President Pence is flying to North Korea, or to South Korea, after he has a meeting this morning with Donald Trump. The billionaire-funded Pence and the billionaire Trump were meeting at 11 o'clock this morning. That would have been a couple of hours ago, East Coast time. And then after that, billionaire-funded Trump was getting on a plane to go to South Korea, where he is taking Otto Warmbier's parents. Otto Warmbier, the young man who stole a poster in a North Korean hotel of, dear leader Kim Jong-un, and was charged with a crime and apparently beat up pretty badly by the North Korean security services. Nobody, that I know anyway, has any, apologia for the North Koreans. I mean, we all agree it's a bizarre dictatorship. It's one of the worst dictatorships on earth right now. But does that mean that you go provoke a confrontation with North Korea? And why would Mike Pence want to do that? Why would he go over there with Otto Warmbier's parents? If you want the Korean perspective on this, now I have not been able to independently confirm this, but Hani, hani.co.kr is a South Korean English language newspaper. The website english.hani.co.kr. And they published an editorial, and it's an unsigned editorial, so I'm assuming that this is the position of the newspaper itself, because it's labeled as editorial. And they're referring to what they call the so-called bloody nose strategy, referring to a limited preventative strike against North Korea. Has gone public following the withdrawal of Victor Cha's nomination to U.S. ambassador to South Korea. The bloody nose is one of Donald Trump administration's military options, a small-scale surgical strike against North Korea nuclear sites or other nuclear facilities that ostensibly would not provoke a response from North Korea. And then they basically say this is crazy. They write, to begin with the idea that North Korea, quote, wouldn't dare, end quote, strike back against the U.S. is both sad and dangerous. It's based on a U.S.-centered mindset that equates a North Korean counterstrike with the end of the Pyongyang regime. But with Trump administration hardliners describing Kim Jong-un as irrational and unpredictable, it's not clear how they're predicting he would reach the same military conclusion as them. It's a gamble where the stake are millions of lives. But then it gets far more interesting. Again, this is how the South Koreans, or at least one newspaper in South Korea, is viewing what Trump and Pence are up to. And this is frightening. Quote, the Russia scandal is raising the possibility that Trump not only faces a difficult road to re-election, but could end up impeached. Depending on how the midterm elections in November turn out, he could find himself a lame duck. This raises the troubling question of whether he might consider a strike against North Korea as a way out of his domestic political crisis. Indeed, White House National Security Council Senior Director for Asian Affairs, Matthew Pottinger, reportedly said in a recent closed-door meeting with U.S. experts on the Korean Peninsula issues that a limited strike on the North might help in the midterm elections. Now, I've got to do a little research on this thing, and I've been trying to track it down. Maybe the folks in our chat room can find this this quote from Matthew Pottinger, Pottinger. But if this is the case, as I said, I haven't been able to confirm this. It may not be true, but the South Koreans, or at least this newspaper in South Korea, believe it to be true. And that's news in and of itself. That the South Koreans believe, or many folks in South Korea believe that Trump might strike North Korea simply to deal with his problems with his son trying to collude with Russia to get his father elected. Wow.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more, and perhaps the answer to this whole thing right after this. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip selection, as opposed to election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, We include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The strip and flip selection of 2016 Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wow. Today, well, first of all, yesterday, an unarmed 16-year-old black boy a young man was shot to death by the police in Los Angeles. Was that?
South LA.
Yeah, South LA. And today would have been the 23rd birthday of Trayvon Martin. He was a science geek and wanted to be an astronaut, and had he lived, he would be possibly graduating from college right now. Incredible. Damon in Las Vegas. Hey, Damon, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, okay, so I got into a heated argument with a Trump supporter, and it was basically about universal health care. And I brought up small countries like Libya and Iraq, which we conveniently destroyed, but they had universal health care. Right. And his argument was the right-wing nutjob argument that the countries are too small. You can't do it in a big country. So anyway, this is what I found doing my research. Germany has universal health care.
They have since 1880, by the way.
Population 82 million. Now, these are the countries' constitutional right to health care. This is really interesting. UK, 63 million. Russia, 150 million.
Yep.
India, 1.3 billion.
Right, although their infrastructure is kind of creaky, but yes.
Now, listen to this. There's some facts about China that's also interesting. 95% of China has universal health care, and by 2020, the entire country, that's the plan, to have universal health care.
Yep.
Now, if China can do it, and India can do it, and Russia can do it, why can't we?
Right, and Germany and France and Denmark and Sweden and Norway and I mean, just pick your country, right? Virtually all of Europe. Mexico. Canada.
Canada, exactly. So my point is this. Next time one of these right-wingers call your show, just tell them India has 1.3 billion people, 4 times the population of America. Explain that.
Right. There you go. Damon, thank you for the call. Well said. And keep up the battles. Keep up the good fight. Thanks, Damon. Edwin in Bullhead City, Arizona. Hey, Damon. Edwin, what's up?
Hey, brother. First of all, Tom, thank you for the work you do. I love you. You're the most. I love you.
Thank you.
It makes me mad. It makes me mad when the guests that you bring on, and they just totally don't have any manners, and they just don't realize that they're your guest, and they just want to scream and yell and talk stupid stuff. This guy, the guy you had on, he's proud to be. He calls his publication Reactionary Times.
Yeah.
Well, reactionary. That means that's not even conservative. That you don't want to hold on to the status quo. You want to go back. Before women voted.
Yep.
Jesus. And I don't know how many times I've had to explain to people when they say, it was the Democrats that had the Ku Klux Klan.
And it was the Democrats who got rid of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, they purged their party of it.
Exactly.
And the Republican Party needs to do the same. Edwin, excellent point. I'm sorry your phone sounds kind of muffled. I'm concerned that people can't understand what you're saying. I think I got it all. But
I tried to turn the speaker off, but it wouldn't go off. It's a cheap phone. Tom,
okay.
I love you.
Edwin, thanks a lot, Edwin, and thank you for your kind words. I got to move along. Ronald in Land O'Lakes, Florida. Hey, Ronald, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was calling pertaining to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that the Constitution was written by the aristocrats and the wealthy, and when they say, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, well, let's look at who was considered the people. It certainly wasn't the blacks, Hispanics, nor women, nor females for that point. And, you know, Native Americans weren't part of We the People either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. But to say that it was all about plutocrats, let me just share with you a little bit here. This is from my book, What Would Jefferson Do, page 73. Hang on just a second. Let me find it. Where did it go? Here we go. In the state of Delaware, which voted for ratification of the convention, almost 77% of the delegates were farmers, more than 2/3 of them small farmers with incomes ranging from 75 cents to $5 a week. Slightly more than 23% of the delegates were professional men, doctors, judges, and lawyers. None of the delegates was a merchant, manufacturer, banker, or speculator in Western lands. In other states, similar numbers show up. Of the New Jersey delegates supporting ratification, 64% were farmers. In Maryland, the opponents of ratification included from 3 to 6 times as large a proportion of merchants, lawyers, and investors in shipping, confiscated estates, and manufacturing as did the delegates who favored ratification. In other words, the rich people opposed ratification of the Constitution. In South Carolina, it was those in economic distress who carried the day. No fewer than 82% of the debtors and borrowers of paper money in the convention voted for ratification of the convention. In New Hampshire, quote, of the known farmers of the convention, 68% favored ratification. And, you know, it goes on. In both Virginia and North Carolina, this is quoting from Ross McDonald, a historian who wrote this. He says, in both states, the wealthy planters, those with personality interests, in other words, slaves, as well as those without personality interests, were divided approximately equally on the issue of ratification. In North Carolina, small farmers and debtors were likewise equally divided. And in Virginia, the great mass of the small farmers and a large majority of the debtors favored ratification of the Constitution. And, you know, it goes on from there. You can also get into the actual individuals who were writing the Constitution. But, you know, that meme, that story, which Charles and Mary Beard really popularized in 1929 with the publication of their history of America. You know, they basically said the Constitution was written by rich guys for rich guys. It just doesn't hold up. And it was ratified by rich guys for rich guys. And it was not the case. In fact, the wealthiest families in the colonies, it was generally the wealthiest families in the colonies who strongly opposed the Revolutionary War and opposed the Constitution because both endangered the stability of their fortunes, most of which were grounded in trade or relationships with England. Thousands of these wealthy families fled the colonies after the Revolutionary War, both to England and Canada. And there is no possible correspondence, no remote connection between these provincial dwellings, this is of the founders, of people like even James Madison, and the magnificent showplaces of the English nobility. Balin writes, there's nothing in the American world to compare with this. You know, Kevin Phillips in his Wealth and Democracy, Political History of the American Rich, he says, quote, and this is, you know, one of the top historians in America, quote, George Washington was one of the richest Americans, was no more than a wealthy squire in British terms. It wasn't until the 1790s, a generation after the War of Independence, that the first American accumulated a fortune that would be worth more than $1 million in today's dollars. The founders and framers were at best what today would be called the upper middle class in terms of lifestyle, assets, and disposable income, for what it's worth. But anyhow, Ronald, was that your point?
Basically, it was, and I do have your book.
Yeah.
And I have to read through that. But, you know, again, you know, who were considered people? Were the blacks considered people?
No, you're absolutely right on that. There was the people who wrote the Constitution. The whole process was not egalitarian in the context of women and of African Americans. It just, you know, it wasn't. And we all acknowledged that, and, you know, it was a horrible stain on America, and we're still dealing with the consequences of it. We're still dealing with the pain of it. And particularly people of color are dealing with the pain of it. And you know, we need to acknowledge that. But the idea that Charles and Mary Beard promoted in the late 20s and early 30s, that the whole point of the Constitution was to solidify wealth, is pretty much disputed when you look at the actual people who both wrote it and who and who ratified it in state after state after state. The wealthy were opposed to the Constitution. They wanted to go back to the Articles of Confederation, where the states basically ran their own shows. Ronald, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Anita in Canandaigua, New York. Hey, Anita, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to say that I think that in general we need, we as in all the people and news media need to kind of stop highlighting the ideas of these Republicans, because in general, I should say Trump supporters, because they really don't, they don't have any new ideas that we haven't heard before, because it's all like the same old stuff about wanting to go back to the 1950s. And when you ask them a direct question such as what about Trump's policies you like, they just talk about their feelings and how, they feel like we're slipping away and, real America and defending traditions, etc. And I really don't think it's productive, but because they can't admit that they've been sold on a bill of goods. They can't admit that he sold them an idea and not an actual policy plan. He sold them on feelings of nostalgia. And we can't argue logic to feelings. They're not going to hear that. It just causes a backfire effect in their brains, where they have to go back and say things like how one of the callers said, the mayoral candidate, I guess he is, that, as a conservative, he likes how Trump is going to help, mitigate some sort of moral decline with his presence there. And that's absolutely absurd. He should read his Bible then, because you judge a tree by its fruit.
Yeah,
and all the fruit he's been shown is rotten.
I agree, Anita. I think you said it very well. That said, what the conservatives are doing is defining morality for the rest of us, and that morality means that nobody ever has an abortion, and that men never marry men, and that's not my idea of morality. Anita, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Or never women marry women, for that matter. Anyhow, we'll be back. Bob Ney is going to check in with us as soon as we finish this commercial break. Stick around. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was just wanting to reflect a little bit on what you're talking about earlier with the previous caller. And by the way, that last caller was right on. He was talking about health care, a previous caller. And I think the reason that our country doesn't have health care, and I've known some health care professionals in my lifetime, I think it's because it doesn't fit with the system to keep us in a state of disarray and disease to capitalize on. Naomi Klein's book points it out. It's also the same reason we have continuing cannabis prohibition, because they wouldn't want people with a little bit of land or even a lot of land to have any parity in the economy, the small farmer, the gardener. I think forestry, regeneration, and agriculture from the ground up is the future of our country in a healing fashion. At some point in time, the people at the top of the ladder might bend towards humanity, might do it in time to help fix up the planet enough to go on generation after generation in a sustainable fashion that most people would want to be alive in. But it looks pretty grim right now until we make these robust policy changes and quit farting around with little pissy politics. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, very well said, Bob. Thanks for your contribution. Kieran in Las Vegas. Hey, Kieran, thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, Tom. It's Corinne, actually.
Corinne.
I appreciate you taking the call. I have a thought, and being that the House and the Senate are really up for grabs for the Democrats now, if we were to take over the House and the Senate and impeach Trump and Pence, could we then have a Democratic president?
No, you would then have Paul Ryan as president.
Well, what if we get rid of him for conspiracy?
Yeah, that's, first of all, Corinne, the odds that we're going to take both the House and Senate are well under 50%. The odds, increasingly, it looks like the odds are really tight that we could even take one or the other, either one of them. Between voter suppression, which is, as we speak, they are removing the names from the voter rolls of people who have common names, which is principally Hispanics and Asians and African Americans. And between voter suppression and gerrymandering, I mean, you've got states that vote roughly 50-50. Michigan and Pennsylvania are classic examples where, a 50-50 vote does not produce a 50-50 outcome, either in the state legislature or in the congressional delegation. In both cases, you end up with about a 7-3 split or a 7-4 split at the best of Republicans versus Democrats. So they have reorganized the structure. They've gone at a cellular level to corrupt our democracy. And at a cellular level, we have been corrupted. And it's going to take a major flush to get rid of that. And I don't think that's going to happen without some sort of major economic disaster, which we might be experiencing right now. I haven't looked at where the stock market is in the last hour. I need to check it out. But Corinne, thanks for the call, and it's a good one. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Oh, welcome back. Oh, my goodness. What a day. What a day. What a day. Bob Ney is with us with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom.
So what's happening in the world today?
Well, I wanted to mention something that's a statistic that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. It might shock some people. We had 8,500 troops in Afghanistan just basically a year ago, and today we have 14,000 troops in Afghanistan. And there's an announcement of 4,000 more, if we all remember right, in August. And the reason I mention this, the headline in the story today, in some news stories from around Al Jazeera and other newspapers, Washington Post, was that, we have announced that ISIS is defeated in Iraq, and we are beginning daily flights out of Iraq into Afghanistan with troops. So, this is going on, but it's not a banner headline. You know what I'm saying?
And at the same time this is happening, Trump pulled the plug on foreign aid for Pakistan, and so China and Iran immediately cut deals with Pakistan, and Pakistan is apparently, messing in Afghanistan. And so we're seeing a spike in the murder of U.S. troops and in the murder of Afghans. I mean, it's just a meltdown. Fareed Zakaria was talking about this on Sunday. It's really grim. By the way, there was a story out of the South Korean press that suggested that Michael Pottinger, who is with the National Security Council, a U.S. official, had said that, there's a quote, in a recent closed-door meeting with U.S. experts on Korean Peninsula issues, that a limited strike on North Korea might help Trump in the midterm elections. Or help the Republicans. The Business Insider, David Choi, says, no, that's not what he said. What he said was that it might score Trump some political points. In either case, apparently the Pentagon is refusing to give Trump bloody nose options for North Korea. Do you know anything about this, Bob?
Well, I've speculated. I don't know much about that, but I have speculated, and I've talked to Talk Media News Service about this, and I actually put on their website a prediction that Kim Jong-un would not be running North Korea within the year. Now, the reason I feel, and again, I don't have solid information for this, but I know at one point in time, now I don't know, maybe the military's changed a bit, but they were looking at options of pinpoint, what I call, precision strikes in North Korea, or a strike. And it would be a strike to kill him, and then with the basis and the thought and of not retaliation by the military, but the military takes over the country, China gives a nod, and the military doesn't retaliate in any form or fashion back at us, and they run the country. And, quote, all's happy. And
I think that's naive.
Yeah. Well, it's a gamble. I've just given you a theory that I really think could happen, right. But it's not a gamble I would want to do if
I would bet that Kim has given the order to his troops along the demilitarized zone that have 8,000 pieces of artillery that they can just rain down tens of thousands of artillery shells and rocket-propelled grenades and missiles, basically, onto Seoul, South Korea, a city of 10 million people. Or is it 20 million? It's a whole bunch of people in any case. It's a country of 50 million. If anything, if the country is attacked, shoot. You don't wait for a command from me. Just shoot. And so even if we took out Kim, I think we're looking at World War III.
Well, I think there's going to be some aggressive move. This Afghanistan, troop movement, by the way, of course, with Afghanistan, we had a civil and a military mission. I went there twice, Tom, and talked with, our top leaders. Mm-hmm. We had civil and military because you couldn't have Afghanistan successful without the civil end. We strictly are on, as I understand it, the military end now, right? So I'm wondering why the increase of so many troops. So what is our objective there? Is what's an exit plan, or are we going to do something? Is this quote, wiping out the rest of the, the terrorist?
Well, it makes a certain amount of sense, Bob. Trump has devastated the State Department, which is the, nation building, the civic part of it, and totally empowered the Pentagon and told his generals, do whatever you want. And of course, the military's mission is to blow up things, break things and kill people. And the military's mission is not to build countries and to provide for civil society. So if you turn the entire thing over to the military, you're not going to get that State Department stuff. And the State Department is just hemorrhaging human beings, and Tillerson is not replacing them, apparently on this libertarian theory that the less government is better. I see this ending very badly with a World War I kind of scenario where a small incident, relatively small in terms of how many people are affected by it. In the case of World War I, it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. In this case, it would be the killing of Kim Jong-un, leads to just a falling of dominoes where you end up in a military confrontation between the United States and China.
Well, and nobody's in the national media is making a pointed question, which is what are we doing?
Right.
We have went from 8,500 to 14,000 in a year.
Right.
So, what are we doing? Yeah. On to the memos, before we run out of time, of course, with the Nunes memos. I thought the most interesting response, Tom, was yesterday was Trey Gowdy, of any of them, on the Sunday shows.
Well, he's liberated now. He's not running for re-election, so he can tell the truth.
Yes, it makes you a different person. That's right.
So he said basically what, Bob? Real quick.
Well, he said basically that this is not a vindication. This is Mueller is still on a certain path.
Yeah, and Trump, and this does not vindicate Trump.
Not a vindication.
Brilliant. Bob Ney with Talk Media News, the author of Sideswiped. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Good talking with you always. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The book is
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So Donald Trump tweets this morning, trash-talking Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff turns around and tweets back, "Mr. President, I see you had a busy morning of executive time," in quotes. Executive time is what they're, how the White House euphemistically refers to Donald Trump watching Fox and Friends. Instead of tweeting false smears, tweets Adam Schiff, "the American people would appreciate it if you turned off the TV and helped solve the funding crisis, protected dreamers, or really anything else." Here we have John McCain and actually more than just one Republican and more than one Democrat. We have a bipartisan piece of legislation that does to protect the dreamers and resolve the immigration crisis. And it's a reasonable piece of legislation, it appears to me. I haven't done a deep dive into it, but it looks like a reasonable piece of legislation that does not include one penny for Donald Trump's beloved border wall. Not a penny. But it has bipartisan support. It would probably pass the House and Senate easily. And Mitch McConnell, in all probability, will not allow a vote to happen. Paul Ryan, in all probability, will not allow a vote to happen. I mean, if just a clean DACA bill was, there is a clean DACA bill in both the House and Senate. Paul Ryan won't allow a vote on it in the House because he knows it would pass. Mitch McConnell won't allow a vote on it in the Senate because he knows it would pass. What the billionaire-funded Republican Party has been doing since the days of Denny Hastert is saying that whenever they have power, whenever they have a majority in either body, they will not entertain any legislation that cannot be passed with majority Republican votes with not a single Democratic vote. It's referred to as the Hastert rule or the modified Hastert rule. And the result of this, the consequence of this, is that even though you have majorities in both the House and Senate who want, lots of very rational policies, they never get voted on because of two people, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. And the only way you're going to get rid of Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, have them no longer be there, is to have, and voting them out of office isn't going to do it, by the way, because Paul Ryan would just be replaced by another right-wing nut job, or, I mean, not necessarily from his district in Wisconsin. You may have a Democrat in that seat. In fact, I think there's a reasonably good chance of it. But there's no shortage of right-wing nut jobs in the U.S. House of Representatives. Look at the Cokehead Caucus, also known as the so-called Freedom Caucus. All these guys who are like, you know, basically the proteges, excuse me, of David and Charles Koch and their network, of the billionaires. So this is, and the media in the United States never, ever points this out. Similarly, I mean, there's a very good chance we're going to have a government shutdown this week. The government's running out of money like on Thursday. Now, it wasn't supposed to run out of money on Thursday. It was supposed to run out of money in like a month. So why is it running out of money on Thursday? Well, because since the start of the year, we're a month and a half into the year, since the start of the year, with the Republican tax scam, these giant tax cuts for the billionaire class and the corporate class, the government's not bringing in enough money. You know, government revenues are drying up. And then the other thing that's happening in the bond markets, now there's been a slight recovery today, but the Dow is still down almost 400 points right now. The other thing that's happening in the bond markets, bonds, of course, are debt instruments. If you want to raise money, you want to start or grow a company, for example, and you want to borrow the money to do it, you don't go to the bank and say, hey, I'd like to borrow $20 million. Instead, what you do is you issue bonds. You become your own bank. Now, you have to have a bank that does it for you. They're sort of the middlemen, but you issue bonds. Bonds are IOUs. So in the IOU market, particularly the federal IOU market, what we've been seeing for the last, well, year is that interest rates are going up. And interest rates are really starting to go up now, and the result of that, from the federal government point of view and the possibility of government shutdown and all that, is that the cost of borrowing goes up. Now, when Ronnie Reagan became president and our national debt was only $800 billion, it wasn't even $1 trillion. Reagan tripled that debt. But when he came in and our national debt was less than $1 trillion, it's $20 trillion right now. And he took the advice of Jude Wanniski and said, we're going to do the two Santa Clauses strategy. When Republicans are in office, run up the debt as hard and as fast as you can and give that money to the billionaires and the corporations. And then when Democrats come into office, start screaming, we don't have enough money for social services. We don't have enough money for food stamps. We don't have enough money for Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. We don't have enough money to build roads and bridges and schools and hospitals. Sorry, we don't have any money. We gave it all to the billionaires. And force the Democrats to say, well, I guess there's not enough money. We'll just have to chain CPI Social Security, which is what President Obama proposed. I mean, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And it's not like it was a secret. Jude Wanniski published this in 1974 in the Wall Street Journal. The year that Nixon fell, and all the Republicans all over the country are going, oh my God, you know, the party is never going to recover. We're doomed. And Jude was like, no, I got it. I got it. We become the tax Santa Claus, and we force the Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus. So anyhow, I digressed slightly from the path of my message, and that is that when you've got a $20 trillion debt and interest rates go up, suddenly you're having to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on interest more than you budgeted for. Whereas before Reagan, when you only had a 0.8% trillion, or 0.8 of $1 trillion deficit, and borrowing costs go up, it's like, it's no big deal. You know, so it costs an extra couple $1 million bucks. No big deal. You know, it's a pimple on the butt of the federal budget, right? It's nothing. So that's a terrible metaphor, isn't it? Get that picture out of my head. Anyhow, the point is that the Republicans are doubling down on two Santa Clauses. And it just blows my mind when I read all these op-eds and these editorials and things where people are going, You know, oh, isn't this interesting? The Republicans don't seem to worry about the deficit. Dick Cheney, when he was vice president, he said deficits don't matter. Of course they don't matter if you're playing the two Santa Claus theory. Run up debt when Republicans are in control and then scream about debt when Democrats are in control. They have been doing this since 1981. Every single year without exception. And the media has still not figured it out, and I'm guessing 4/5 of the Democratic Party hasn't figured it out. And I keep trying to tell them. I mean, the first time I published a piece on this was in Common Dreams back in, I think, 2003. So what, 12 years ago, something like that? 14, anyway, like I said, I don't do math. 13 years ago, right? How many years? 15 years. Thank you, Sean. You're good at math. I'm math deficient. I really struggled with trig. I'm not even sure I passed it. But in any case, the possibility of a government shutdown is very real, and and it raises some interesting issues. Specifically, what are the Democrats going to do? Because I think that they're being backed into a corner here. The two Santa Claus theory, the two Santa Claus strategies the Republicans are pursuing. If, the Republicans will not be able to raise the debt ceiling all alone because of the cokehead Freedom Caucus. So the billionaire-funded Republican Party can't pull this thing off. They're going to need Democrats. And if the Democrats don't vote to raise the debt ceiling, they will be blamed for shutting the government down. But if they do vote to raise the debt ceiling, they're playing into the Republicans' hands. What should they do?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Also, if they don't vote to raise the debt ceiling, that could precipitate an international financial crisis if the U.S. starts defaulting on its debt. That's never happened before. We'll be back. And welcome back. Pat in Juanita, Nebraska. Am I saying that right, Pat?
You said it perfectly. We spell Juanita with a W and an E.
Ah, great. Okay, so what's on your mind, Pat? You want to talk about healthcare?
Yes. NPR on May 3rd, 2016 reported medical errors rank behind heart disease and cancer as the third leading cause of death in the United States. According to a Johns Hopkins study, more than 250,000 Americans die each year from medical errors. That's 10% of U.S. deaths each year from preventable medical mistakes.
Well, the preventable part is the problem. I mean, that includes people who get, Clostridium from hospital, pick up pathogens in hospitals and that are not treatable or not easily treated. That includes obviously screw-ups, but it also includes structural oversights. I mean, our healthcare system is badly compromised because it's so atomized, it's so scattered. There's not a universal healthcare would really would probably reduce that by half.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that I don't think this is the fault of medical professionals per se. I think it's because insurance companies get to decide what procedures and care we don't or do get. And that's a big problem. That shouldn't even be in the mix. What are we doing? And anyway, that's why I support Medicare for all and yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes there's even a delay in providing services because the hospital or the physicians have to check with the health insurance company and find out if they'll pay for the procedure. And the health insurance companies, different companies have different policies. So if you had a single-payer healthcare system, every doctor, every hospital would know instantly, okay, we want to do this, it's covered. We want to do that, but it's not covered. Well, I guess we'll do this rather than the that. Whereas now it's like, okay, well, does United Healthcare cover that? Does Blue Cross cover that? I don't know. And so, yeah, our healthcare system is one of the least efficient in the developed. It is the least efficient in the developed world.
It's wrong. It's sick and wrong.
Yeah, and it's killing Americans. Well said, Pat.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for the call. Chuck in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Chuck, we got a minute to the break. What's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom, I was just curious that, you're critical of Citizens United, and I was just curious about what you thought of Tom Steyer putting in $200,000 to promote the cap-and-trade legislation in Oregon?
I think there are times when you have to fight fire with fire. Just because you disagree with a policy doesn't mean that if you're in the game, you don't play the game by the rules of the game. You fight to change the rules of the game, but if you're going to stay in the game, you have to play by the rules.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chuck. And you know, and I get that, and I hear Republicans going, "Oh, you're so concerned about, you know, the billionaire-controlled Republican Party spending all this money on things, but you've got Tom Steyer." You know, it used to be George Soros, right? Now it's Tom Steyer. But the reality is, you know, the Democrats mostly raise their money from, well, I don't know if it's mostly, but, you know, the Democrats celebrate raising money from small donors. And, you know, the Republicans celebrate billionaires owning their party and giving gifts to billionaires like the GOP tax scam that just happened. So, anyhow, we'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, you've had a couple callers recently that were Trump supporters, and I thought they were prime examples of how people are voting not for their not because of economic anxiety, but because of cultural anxiety. Mm-hmm. Your first caller from Kentucky was, what did he say? Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are like sound like they're speaking from another planet or something.
Yeah.
And then this guy started talking about deviance. I guess he was talking about gay marriage or something.
Yeah.
And
presumably.
And as long as they understand, I think people understand more than we think they do. And I think they understand that Democrats would make their lives better. I think they understand that Donald Trump is not like making their lives better, but they have such cultural anxiety, and Donald Trump is very good at addressing that, at talk about understanding that and where that comes from.
Well, he's also, Anita, good at lying through his teeth. I mean, I'll continue the list that I was sharing with Julio. This is from Robert Reich's piece that was reprinted over on Alternet. I think it probably originated at robertreich.org or .com, whichever his website is. He said he promised 6 weeks of paid maternity leave. Well, Ivanka is now working that out with Marco Rubio. It means you get to delay your Social Security. He said that on day one he'd label China a currency manipulator. No. He said he wouldn't bomb Syria.
Lies.
Right.
Yes.
He lied.
He made
Go ahead.
lots of promises, and I think people do understand that he was lying.
Yeah.
I think they do. I remember listening to some of the reporters there, and they would talk to these supporters, and they go, "Oh, well, we know he's not going to really build a wall," or they know that his products are all made in China. They understand those things, but he addressed their cultural anxiety, and he is stopping progress. These people are freaked out about LGBT rights. They're freaked out about women's rights. They're freaked out about just minority rights, civil rights. People have been voting against their economic interests since the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And I don't think we are the majority now. And we need to get our people out and stop trying, because we're not going to convince them to vote for Democrats if we're just telling them we want universal health care. Most of them support that. Most of them support Social Security, but they still vote against that.
Right.
So
yeah,
I think what we need to do is get our people out to vote.
I agree.
It's why it's important.
It's a conundrum, but I would add to that, Anita, in my opinion, the Democratic Party needs to fine-tune its economic message so that it's clear. Trump said that he was going to bring jobs back to the United States.
No, they know better.
I don't think so.
Listen to that guy that talked about coal. He knew that Donald Trump wasn't going to bring back coal jobs. He understood that. And he said he wasn't a very educated man, but he understood that.
Yeah.
So these people do understand it. They just can't vote for Democrats because Democrats represent all their cultural anxiety.
Right.
You know?
Gay people, people of color. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even women.
And women.
They want to take back women's rights. Yeah.
And so what happens is, as the culture shifts, the political alliances shift, and the culture definitely is shifting. I mean, 15 years ago, I would not have believed that gay marriage would have even been legalized within 15 years. It's
freak them out. Well, these are people that worship Bruce Jenner. Now she's Caitlyn Jenner.
Right.
This is big changes really, and they did happen very quickly.
Yeah, and they don't handle it well. Well said, Anita. Anita, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Kelly in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind?
I called last week, but I didn't get a chance to tell you. Right after the election, I heeded your advice, and I got active, and I became a precinct committee person. That ended up putting me in the position to be the president of Lake Havasu Democratic Association.
Wow.
I'm also the second vice chair for the county now.
That's
great. We're having our annual dinner. Yeah, I know it, and it's work, but it's work that's pleasure because you're doing good. I can see good every day.
Yeah.
We're having a dinner this Saturday, which is an annual presidential dinner, but this year we're calling it the Lincoln Obama dinner. Mm-hmm. We have candidates that are coming for speakers, and I hear people call your show all the time from this county, and I want to know why they're not coming to the meetings.
Good question. Get out to the meetings. Kelly, where are the meetings? When are the meetings? And what should people expect if they show up?
You can go to Democrats or Mojave Democrats.org, and you can find all the information you need right there.
Okay, and if somebody shows up, are they going to be charged? Are they going to be solicited? Are they going to, or is it just open doors? Come on in, have a good time. I mean, what sort of experience do they should on a social level? What will they experience?
I would say it's very open. We have independents that come to our meetings.
Welcome with open arms.
Exactly.
You just had
a brunch with a candidate Sunday, and there were independents and progressive groups there along with the Democratic groups.
That's great.
So we are definitely pulling it together here.
That is great. Kelly, what you are doing is the very best therapy for anybody who's freaked out about politics today. And I so honor what you've done, and congratulations. So keep us up to date on how everything's going, okay?
Good to you, sir.
Thank you, Kelly. Good talking with you. Jasper in Atlanta. Hey, Jasper, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've come to the conclusion that this country is not going to ever be the same again. And until they get money out of politics, I don't know what it is that we need to do in order to get that Citizens United thing repealed and replaced. Because like you said earlier, that they've always got people hanging around so they can buy off and do that.
Yeah. Well, if we hadn't had the Electoral College, Al Gore would have been president. He won the popular vote by 500,000 votes. And Hillary Clinton would have been president. She won the popular vote by 3 million votes. And both of them would have appointed relatively progressive Supreme Court justices, and they would have struck down, I believe, the Buckley case from '76, and the Citizens United case never would have happened. But we've got gerrymandering, and we've got all this structural stuff we've got to deal with. And there are ways to deal with it. A lot of states have changed their laws to say whoever wins the majority vote actually gets all our electoral votes, which is how you do away with the Electoral College. But it's step by step, Jasper. It's a hell of a job. I got to run. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after the news here at the bottom of the hour. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, the case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, there was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, "Let me try the son of a bitch. I can hit him." He got down off his horse, kneeled down, and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped. We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Broadcasting live from Hawaii to, well, actually, we're all over the world. Anyhow, James in Wichita, Kansas. James, what's on your mind today?
That lady who just called a minute ago about Republicans, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's not getting it. Okay, you have gay marriage, right? The thing that I sit there and say all the time. Okay, you have gay marriage. Why can I have 2 wives? You want to smoke weed up there in California and all that kind of stuff?
Well, hang on just a second. Having 2 wives is a whole different thing than being gay.
No, it's not. No, it's a marriage. It's a
No,
marriage.
I'm sorry, James. You are not born wanting 2 wives.
I'm done. So if you want reciprocity with California for weed, I'm pretty sure you want to be able to smoke weed in Texas. I don't mind having that reciprocity with you. But then again, let me have the reciprocity of bringing my gun to California. There's no compromise with you. There's no compromise.
No, there's no, absolutely not. The right of a state.
There you go.
The right of a state. Yeah, you're right, James. I am absolutely drawing a line. The right of a state to regulate the quality of life in their state is pretty substantial. And I would think that as a conservative, you would defend the 10th Amendment. Although, apparently you're a Fox conservative because you talk over the host all the time. Like,
I would take your weed in Texas. It wouldn't bother me. Again, you can be gay and be married. I just want my 2 wives.
No,
I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, that's a BS argument, James. That's a total BS argument.
How is it a BS argument? That's what I want.
It's the same as if you let gay people marry, next they're going to marry dogs. No, people are not born. James, get this through your thick head. People are not born wanting 2 wives.
We're talking about people. We're not talking about dogs. Again,
I am talking about human beings. Okay, James. Thank you for the call. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Tom?
I'm well. What's up?
Okay, basically I'm calling because I love what you said the other day that, how you say it, is corrupting democracy. The system that we work on, of course, the monetary system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's your thing, I know. Or the thing that you are concerned about, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And basically, we're seeing the markets. I just feel like the markets, to some extent, is rigged. Because now you're seeing the Dow is plunging. I don't know if you're watching CNN or if you have any other.
I see the Dow is plunging. It's down 573 points right now.
Exactly. And basically what I'm saying is, they knew the fix was in when Trump won, and basically to get this tax bill passed, they had to run all this across the American people. That the economy was growing so well, and it was actually growing more substantially under him, and those prices were inflated.
Yeah.
And then to hear over the weekend that they want a correction, I'm like, these people, they will do anything, first of all, to get in the power, and when they get in the power, they want to take all the money that they want to steal it. But what I'm saying is, I think the reason why they have, they're so concerned that, that inflation is going to rise because they raise wages is because they didn't do a national increase in the wage. And I think that's what Democrats have to point out. If these guys ever want a tax cut again, we have to do something about raising wages across the board nationally.
Right.
We got to increase wage scale, and I think that's the reason why they're so scared now. Because I think that the market, has to, I guess, how do you say, has to make up.
Yeah. Here's my take on it, Charles. Billionaires like Donald Trump and billionaires who have their wealth tied up in the stock market, they don't care if the market goes up or down, just so long as they know which direction it's heading. When the market goes down, that creates for them buying opportunities and short sale opportunities. When the market goes up, of course, they just ride the market up. And one of the reasons why I read the Financial Times every day is because it is rich people talking to rich people, and you want to know what the hell's going on with the rich people. And there had been so many articles in the Financial Times over the last 3 weeks saying, you know, the price-earnings ratio is almost twice what it should be. $1.5 trillion of new bonds that the government's going to have to issue to borrow that money so that they can give it to the billionaire class. That's going to drive up interest rates. There's not going to be that much demand for, plus the end of quantitative easing. All these things are flooding the market with bonds. So the yield, the value of bonds is going down, so the yield goes up, and that's ultimately going to affect the stock market. I mean, there was like almost not a single day that went by over the last 3 weeks without an article in the Financial Times that was either explicitly or implicitly arguing that at any minute the bottom was going to fall out of the stock market. So much so that the week before last, on Wednesday or Thursday of the week before last, you know, my little retirement nest egg, which was partly in the stock market, I said, okay, that's it. I'm totally out of the stock market. I'm totally in cash right now. And that was before the market started to fall. It was just so obvious to me. There was all these warning signs. I was talking about it on this show. And now, sure enough, here it is. And you know, for people like, you know, billionaires like Trump and billionaires like the Kochs with the, you know, money managers and financial managers, all they had to do is read the Financial Times, if they weren't the ones who were feeding the Financial Times the information, and say, okay, it's time to get out. And, you know, we'll let it crash down. And when it crashes down, we'll buy in like they did in 2009, buying at 6,000, ride it up to 25,000, bail out at 25,000, watch it fall to 17, 18,000, buy in, ride it up to 30,000. I mean, this is how these guys get rich with stocks. And like I said last Friday, you know, it took me, you know, the first 30 years of being in business to figure out that there was even a business cycle. And I guess I'm a slow learner. But spot on, the stock market bubble is a fake, and it is crashing now because of the Republican tax scam. And I don't think that the Nunes memo is helping. It's hurting, you know, internationally. It's hurting American credibility and the ability of people to trust us. But more than that, it really, I think, is the Republican tax scam. You know, throwing $1.5 trillion of debt into a country and then stopping quantitative easing at the same time, both of those requiring massive bond issues, are going to just drive down the demand for bonds, and which means that bonds have to start paying more to encourage people to buy them, which is called rising yields. Yields go up, the cost of borrowing goes up, the cost of the federal debt is going to go up, or is going up. Right now, it is up. And then the stock market goes down. And all of this is catching Donald Trump flat-footed. He thought he could brag about the stock market for the next 4 years and ride it into his second term. The guy is delusional, and this should prove it. Charles, excellent points all. Thank you for the call. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
About the business cycle and capitalism. You know, invariably capitalism concentrates. The only way to have a political economy where, you know, that doesn't happen is to have lots of regulations. We need, you know, to regulate the economy and make it work for the middle class, or else we're just doomed. And that is how it's done throughout Western Europe, you know, throughout the world. You know, in any country that has a large middle class, they you know, do regulate, you know, and try to break that cycle. And it's actually good for capitalism, because if people have money in their pocket to spend, it stabilizes the economy. If it just keeps concentrating at the top, nothing, you know, we're going to end up like Brazil or Argentina, and we can see the political and also economic mess that those countries get into, because they, you know, it's just untenable, and they have coup d'états, and then they take over. You know, I mean, it's not, you know, unreasonable to think that could possibly happen in this country. So, you know, we ought to keep that in mind when we want to have a political economy and a democracy that we used to have, and it was the envy of the world. We need to get back to regulating our economy and, putting, doing, I mean, you've mentioned all of these things indirectly throughout your show. I've been listening for now many years, and, you're spot on with everything as far as how we can change that. But we need to remember that that is the goal, is to have a political economy where, the wealth is spread out. If you don't have spread out wealth, you have concentration of power. You don't have a democracy. Simple as that. I've never seen a democracy where the wealth was in a few hands and people actually had any kind of control at all.
Well, democracies that go through this kind of oligarchic phase that we're going through right now end up not being democracies.
Absolutely. They end up like Germany, like Nazi Germany, like Europe was before the war, like Britain was before the war. These were not really democracies. People, British subjects really were subject. They were subject to being abused by the upper classes. And this is not what we want. And, as a progressive, I want that to change, and we need to keep our mind, focused on that, and all of this hubbub about this idiot that is, in our White House. We need to look past all of that. That's what I'm trying to keep my sanity by looking past that, being involved, and, this is what we want. This is how we want things to move toward, universal health care, a regulated economy. We don't want to spend money on arms, nuclear weapons, things of this sort, because it gets you nowhere except, death. That's what we're looking at. If we don't get involved, we're looking at, possibly the end of humanity, because they're focusing now on building more and better nuclear weapons. I mean, this is just a waste of money. And then the wall. Look at how many teachers we could hire, what kind of infrastructure we could have with spending $20, $30, $40 billion, or actually what it really would cost is about $100 billion, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, this, some...
Well said, John. I got a boogie. We're hitting a break. Thank you for the call, and you are always spot on. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And Donald Trump is in Ohio telling these working people, yeah, tax cuts are going to be great for you. Right. Welcome back. Marcy in Arlington, Texas. Hey, Marcy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was wondering if you've seen the commercial for Trumpy Bear.
No, I have not.
Okay, it's a bear with Donald's hair, and it is stuffed with an American flag. And the fine print on the commercial makes you think that this money is going towards his reelection campaign. Does anybody for 1 minute think he's not getting a piece of that bear?
I don't know.
Personally.
I haven't seen the ads, and I don't know who's advertising it, but it costs a lot of money to buy television ads, so somebody's...
Well, they sell the bear for $40 to $19 payments. But
so this is like an infomercial on TV, like, selling Swiffers and stuff?
I've seen it on Inspiration of the network. Actually, these are the old television shows like Big Valley and Daniel Boone and Bonanza. But that's where I've seen it, and I was just floored.
Well, that's those are cheaper ad buys on television. Instead of millions, it's hundreds of thousands. But that's still Nate found it.
If you can
get flash up on the screen there. We're showing it right now on Free Speech TV, or a little piece of it. We don't want to show so much that we're running a commercial for the thing, but fascinating.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I was talking to the man that's going to file my taxes, and I just wonder, people are probably just now starting to get their stuff together. People don't realize that the married exemption eliminates children.
Right.
And I think when they start filing their taxes, they're going to be real surprised that it is actually costing them more. And
although that'll be a year from now, because this April, people are filing their taxes for 2017, and the tax law is not retroactive. So it's going to take them a year and 2 months before they figure out how badly they got screwed.
So the 17 taxes,
you pay your 2017 taxes in April of 2018. April 15th,
Right.
2018. So in April of this year, the taxes that people are paying are the taxes from 2017. And so when they do their tax tables and everything, they're just going to think, oh, it looks like it wasn't a big deal. And a year from now, they're going to say, whoa, what happened? But they're not going to add 2 and 2 together, most people, and say, well, that happened a year and a half ago. So, I mean, these guys are slick.
When Democrats come back in office.
Yeah. Actually, if the Democrats take the House or Senate in 2018, and then in April of 2018, people are going, whoa, what happened to my taxes? You can bet that the billionaire-owned Fox News is going to be out there.
Will be blamed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because these guys, they're such facile liars. They're so good at it. And it's, I don't know.
And another point, any gain in your income now, I think you ought to really look at what your health insurance is costing you now. Because that's probably going to offset anything you're going to get.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Marcy, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's check out our geeky science for the day. Yep, it's our geeky science segment here. Psilocybin, this from zmescience.com, an article by Alexandru Micu. Magic mushrooms could help people nip authoritarianism in the bud. I think the bottom line of this story is it's time to get Donald Trump high. But, I'm not calling for that. It would just maybe be a desirable thing. And here's why. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, has been shown again and again to elicit changes in people's demeanor and personality. Psilocybin can make people feel more connected to nature and less supportive of authoritarianism. And by the way, these are permanent changes. Mushrooms can cause long-lasting changes in these areas of the brain. They found, this was a fairly substantial study, 1,487 participants found that people reported enjoying time spent in nature and were more likely to feel part of nature after taking psychedelics like LSD or magic mushrooms. Another study found that the use of psychedelics was associated with liberal and libertarian political views, more openness to new experiences, and feelings of being related to nature. They did a huge study at Imperial College London on this, and the question was, is this cause or effect? Or is there a causal line here? In other words, is the psilocybin causing people to be less interested in authoritarianism and more interested in nature? Or do you have people who don't like authoritarianism and love nature taking psilocybin? So they did this study where they took a whole group of people. The team surveyed each participant about their political views in relationship to nature before the first session. They gave them 2 doses of psilocybin, 10 milligrams and 25 milligrams, a week apart. And they surveyed them afterwards. Participants who received psilocybin showed a significant increase in nature relatedness 1 week into the study, and that change persisted until the 7 to 12 month follow-up. So a year later, people were more connected to nature from just 2 doses of psilocybin and less interested in authoritarianism. Participants who didn't receive psilocybin didn't show any significant change in attitudes or behavior patterns. And then here's some quotes from people in the study. Quote, "Before I enjoyed nature, now I feel part of it. Before I looked at it as a thing, like TV or a painting. But now I see that there's no separation or distinction. You are nature." And then another, and this was published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology. So it's a real study in a real journal. Irene in New York City. Hey, Irene, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Nice to talk to you. I have such respect for you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to be quick because I know you've got so much stuff. The dismantling of all our protections, mostly for little people. There's an article on the front page of the New York Times today about payday lending.
Yep.
And how the Wunderkind, Mick Mulvaney,
Yep.
at the Consumer
CFPB,
Protection Agency, the hard-won agency under Elizabeth Warren, is now rolling back restrictions on these bloodsuckers. We know, because of this so-called tax break for people, that the average person is going to be losing income. More and more people could potentially be going to these vultures for money, and they're going to be, I mean, this is usury. This is like medieval stuff.
Yep. This is an industry that Republicans love, and it's exploitative of low-income people, and just nakedly, openly, and it is a function, by the way, that could very easily be fulfilled by the post office, and that was Bernie Sanders. One of the things that he ran on was, allow the post office to be basically a small lender at a low interest rate, and without a profit motive. But these guys, there are people who have become billionaires in this industry. Lots and lots of multimillionaires in this industry, and you don't get billions or millions of dollars without taking it from somebody else. And since all of their customers are poor and low-income people, that's who's being ripped off. Irene's spot on, and I recommend that article in the New York Times. I read it this morning. In fact, I thought about doing it on the air today, and I thought, well, maybe tomorrow. But thank you for bringing it up, because Mick Mulvaney is a cancer. Thank you so much.
Oh, God, he's horrible.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Scott in Hurricane, West Virginia. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
Getting after why wages are down and been stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so simple. You trace it back to the air traffic controllers, and boom, it's clear as day.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan declared war on working people in 1981, and that war has not stopped.
I watched it happen. I'm a journeyman tool and die maker, and I watched it happen, and it's nonstop. We're 30% of the nation was union. Now it's 3%.
6%. Yeah.
Those unions, a lot of those are law enforcement unions.
Yeah, you're right. Law enforcement, fire, and government employees. That's
pretty scary.
Yeah, it really is, Scott. It really is. And you're spot on right. I mean, Ronald Reagan declared war on unions, on working people, and the Republican Party had unions in their crosshairs for a long time. In 1947, the Republican Party passed Taft-Hartley over the veto, two vetoes by Harry Truman, and they just kept bringing it back, and finally Truman couldn't veto it anymore. They had a supermajority, and Taft-Hartley established the so-called right to work for less. And so you've got now, about half the union now, half the countries in this nation are right to work for less states, and it's growing. And it's just another way of destroying unions. So, and the reason, of course, the Republicans hate unions, in addition to the fact that Republicans, the billionaire-funded Republicans hate working people, is that the billionaire-funded Republicans also knew that the unions were a major source of financial support for the Democratic Party. And, of course, they hate the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party stands up for working people. Well said, Scott. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening there in West Virginia. Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Hey, Mike, you're going to have to call back tomorrow. I'm sorry. I've just got 10 seconds before the show is out, and I don't want to do that to you. I missed my cue. I'm so sorry. Mike, I'm going to put you on hold here, and I think, if I can find the hold button. Ironically, my call screen software just froze up, too. Perfect timing. Mike, thanks for the call, and we'll catch your topic tomorrow. Sincere apologies. Thanks so much for being with us today. The Dow is down 642 right now as Trump is talking about how wonderful his tax cut's going to be for America. Right. The tax, this Republican, billionaire-funded Republican tax scam is, in my opinion, the largest reason why the Dow is crashing as we speak. Don't think you're going to hear that in a lot of other places, but I can back it up. Anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.